Hello guys, welcome to DrNightStare. I know you guys come here to relax and take a nap. So before we go, please hit like and subscribe. By the way, also tell me what time and where you guys listening from. Alright then. I stepped into the house as first light crept across the hallway. My mother, Arlene, stood in the kitchen, back straight. She did not turn when I closed the door. Her presence promised trouble. "You are home early," she said without turning, her voice flat. My skin prickled. "Yes," I replied, my voice tight, heading for the stairs. "Stop," Arlene commanded. I froze. She turned, eyes narrowed, sweeping over me. My denim jacket felt too thin. "What is that?" Arlene pointed at my left sleeve. I looked down. A dark, rusty stain marred the cuff, barely visible but undeniable. "It is nothing," I mumbled, pulling my arm back. "It is not nothing," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "That looks like blood, Sarah." A cold wave washed over me. "I fell," I said, words hollow. I scraped my arm. Arlene stopped in front of me, face grim. "You have been acting strange for weeks," she stated, quiet but firm. "Staying out late, coming home at odd hours. You are withdrawn and distracted." My stomach tightened. They had noticed. "And now this," she gestured to the stain. "You are not telling me the truth." Her gaze was unwavering, filled with deep suspicion that saw through every excuse. It told me she feared something worse, something I could not explain. The morning air felt heavy around us, her questions revolving around the stain, my behavior, my dark secret. I raced up the stairs, leaving my mother's gaze behind, and locked my bedroom door. Adrenaline still surged through me. I walked to the mirror, pulling up my sleeve. The small blood stain on the denim seemed insignificant compared to the deep ache now spreading beneath my skin. My forearm pulsed. Dark tendrils began to spread just below the surface, tracing black paths along my veins. They coiled and twisted up my arm. A grotesque network appeared against my pale skin. A cold power flowed through them. My jaw tightened. I watched the transformation without panic. I focused, pushing the darkness back, feeling the chill recede. The black lines slowly faded, pulling themselves back into the depths of my being. My skin cleared, leaving a lingering coolness and the knowledge of what lay hidden. I could not let anyone discover this. I was making coffee when a soft knock sounded at my door. I pulled it open to see Amy standing on the porch, her expression tight and etched with concern. "Nathan," she began, her voice quiet but carrying an urgent edge, "I truly need to talk to you about Sarah." I stepped back, allowing her to enter, a sense of unease already coiling in my gut before she even spoke another word. "I saw her at Mark's funeral yesterday," Amy continued, her gaze direct and unwavering. "It was unsettling, Nathan." She laughed during the eulogy. It was a real, audible laugh that drew stares from other mourners. It felt out of place. Then, later, when Mrs. Peterson was openly weeping, Sarah just sat there staring intently at her phone screen. She offered no comfort to anyone around her. A cold knot tightened in my stomach at the words. Sarah? At Mark's funeral? My voice dropped low with disbelief and confusion. She told me she had to work late yesterday. She said she had a big project. Amy shook her head slowly. "She was there, Nathan. I saw her speaking to other attendees, chatting as if it were a casual social gathering. She openly complained about the length of the service to anyone who would listen. She even made a flippant remark about Mark's tie. Her behavior was disrespectful, Nathan. Everyone present witnessed her startling lack of empathy throughout the entire event. My mind began to process the image of Sarah, my girlfriend, acting in such a callous, indifferent manner. This detailed account did not match the person I believed her to be. Amy was a straightforward person. She did not invent stories. Her eyes held a genuine, persistent worry that I found impossible to dismiss or ignore. This sudden, unsettling information crashed over me. It compelled me to confront a truth about Sarah I had avoided seeing. The actual character of the woman I loved now felt unknown, shrouded in a new and uncomfortable mystery. A cold feeling settled in my chest as Amy's words about Sarah at the funeral echoed in my mind. I thought about Sarah dismissing my worries for a sick friend, calling my concern melodrama. I had previously pushed that memory aside, explaining it as her practical nature. Then I remembered a time when she insisted on making every decision for our weekend getaway, disregarding my own ideas. She asserted her will in a manner that felt absolute. I could still recall the sharp tone in her voice when I suggested an alternative. Her laughter at the funeral, her disinterest in Mrs. Peterson's deep grief, these were not singular events. They were pieces of a larger design. The truth surfaced now. Sarah often displayed little regard for others' feelings when it was inconvenient for her. She sought control in many situations. The person I loved, the Sarah I believed I knew, shifted into something unfamiliar. An uncomfortable reality began to take hold. Sarah was someone else. Driven by his growing doubts, I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over Sarah's name. I pressed call. "Come over," I said when she answered. "We need to talk." Her reply was immediate, clipped. "I know," she said. The sound of her voice sent a shiver through me. The confrontation was coming. A sharp crack erupted deep within my body, ripping through me with brutal force, and a cold sensation of tearing spread through my being. My limbs locked, and muscles seized with rigidity throughout my form, as a powerful presence within my spine began to shift and strain, compelling my body downwards into a kneeling posture, leaving me paralyzed. From my perception of my own spine, a spectral form began to unfurl. It undulated and pulsed with an impossible intricacy, writhing in the dim space above me. This was an impossible dance I saw with my eyes and felt deep in my bones. The undulating form's foremost point drifted closer to my face, its spectral presence hovering just before my eyes. From its pointed tip, a radiant liquid began to spill, catching the scarce light in the dimness. An undeniable urge spread through my seized body, forcing my jaw to unclench and my mouth to part. A silent command I could not resist. I accepted the cold, radiant offering as it flowed onto my tongue. The liquid was lost memories, a forgotten essence, a familiar awareness that had been buried deep within me for a long time. It crackled with an ancient energy, seeping into my throat and then into my being with an intensity. My vision began to blur, the spectral world around me dissolving into indistinct shapes and colors. The boundaries of my mind started to dissolve, my sense of self fraying at the edges. My conscious thought receded into a hazy current. The spectral spine slowly began its return. It did not pass through my mouth but merged with my core being. Cold tendrils coiled deep within my stomach. An intricate knot took root there, unsettling my core. I was left utterly hollowed, yet an alien presence filled me. It had claimed me. My body was its vessel now, fundamentally altered, bound to its disturbing will. The steel locker door scraped against its frame as I pushed it open slowly. My muscles ached from the cramped position I had held through the long night. The ship's engines rumbled deep within its belly, a constant vibration that had become another layer of the terror that kept me hidden. My stomach burned with a hunger that had surpassed fear, a physical ache demanding immediate attention. The corridor outside seemed clear. The air felt cold. I stepped out, my legs stiff, and moved quietly along the narrow passage. The ship lights cast a pale, yellowish glow on the worn linoleum floor. I remembered yesterday, or what I thought was yesterday, when these passages felt normal, filled with other passengers on their way to Sydney. Now, a stillness permeated everything. I reached the main deck where I expected to find a bustling morning scene. Instead, a few figures moved slowly, without purpose. A woman sat at a table, her hands flat on the polished wood. Her eyes were open, wide, but saw nothing. Her face showed no emotion. She breathed shallowly. Another man stood by the railing, staring out at the gray, featureless ocean. He did not blink. His posture remained rigid, fixed. I walked past them, my footsteps sounding loud in the quiet space. They did not react to my presence. They did not seem to hear me at all. They were like puppets, waiting for a hidden hand to animate them. Further along, near the stern, I saw other figures. They moved differently with a subtle, unsettling grace. They were taller, their limbs slightly elongated. Their skin appeared smooth, almost waxy. One figure glided past me, its head turning with an unnerving slowness. Its eyes, dark and flat, registered nothing. A shiver ran down my spine, a cold awareness that these were not human beings. They were something else, something wearing human skin like a poorly fitted garment. The main lounge, once vibrant with the chatter of tourists and the clatter of breakfast dishes, was now equally subdued. The tables were set neatly, napkins folded precisely. No one ate. No one spoke. The smell of something cooking drifted from the galley, drawing me with a powerful, desperate pull. My hunger made me reckless, pushing aside the fear. I needed food. I found the galley door ajar. Inside, a man stood over a griddle, flipping pancakes with practiced ease. He wore a chef's uniform, white and clean. This man moved with purpose. He seemed normal, an anchor in the growing strangeness. Hope, fragile but persistent, flickered within me. "Hello?" I said, my voice hoarse. The man turned slowly. He had kind eyes, or what appeared to be kind eyes, behind a pair of spectacles. A small smile touched his lips. His face had wrinkles, lines of age and experience. He looked different from the blank-faced passengers, different from the waxy figures. "Good morning," he said, his voice soft, almost a whisper. "You must be hungry." I nodded, unable to speak, my throat tight. The smell of the pancakes filled the air, thick and sweet. It felt like salvation. "Sit down." He gestured to a small table near the counter. "I have coffee and a fresh plate for you." I sat, watching him. He moved around the galley with an easy confidence, pouring coffee into a mug, sliding pancakes onto a plate, adding a dollop of butter. He placed the plate before me. The food looked real, smelled delicious. I picked up my fork, my hand trembling slightly. "Thank you," I managed to say. He leaned against the counter, watching me eat. I devoured the pancakes, the warm, sweet dough a comfort against the hollowness inside me. The coffee burned my tongue, a welcome sensation. "It's good, isn't it?" he asked. I nodded again, my mouth full. "A strange journey, this one," he continued, his gaze drifting towards the galley door. "People change on the water. They forget things. They stop asking questions." I swallowed, looking up at him. "What's happening?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Where are we going?" He sighed, a long, slow breath. "We are going where we are meant to go," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "And where that is depends on you." His words made no sense, yet they carried a weight, a disturbing undertone. I looked around the empty galley, then back at him. "The others," I began, "the passengers." He waved a hand dismissively. "They are just passing through. Some make it to the other side, some don't." He picked up a polishing cloth and began wiping the already gleaming counter. "This ship, it takes many forms. Sometimes it's a ferry to Manly. Sometimes it's a cruise to nowhere. It all depends on what you believe you see." "I don't understand," I said, the food suddenly tasting less appealing. The unease returned, a cold knot in my stomach. "You will," he replied, a knowing look on his face. "Or you won't. The journey is long. There are rules. Break them, and you find yourself in a different sort of passage." "Rules?" I questioned. "What rules?" He wiped a spot on the counter carefully. "One rule above all others: never look too closely at what you think you know. Maintain the illusion. Believe the ferry takes you to where you want to go. Don't question the itinerary. Don't question the passengers. Don't question me. Just believe the journey is normal." My fork clattered onto the plate. The food, which had been a lifeline, now felt tainted. The man, the cafe guy, his normalcy was a veneer. His kind eyes held an unsettling depth. "But it's not normal," I argued, my voice rising slightly. "They're not right. And last night, the knocking, the sounds." He stopped polishing, his gaze sharpening. "What you heard last night, what you see now, those are just the engines running, the ship settling. This ferry, it has character." He smiled then, a wide, unsettling smile that did not reach his eyes. "Do not let your mind create what does not exist. That is the first mistake. It brings the wrong kind of attention." "What kind of attention?" I asked, my heart beginning to pound. "The kind you do not want," he said, his voice dropping. "The kind that ensures you never reach the shore you hoped for. This ship, it carries many souls. Some find their destination. Others become part of the ship itself, forever adrift." He pushed a fresh cup of coffee towards me. "Eat, drink, stay strong. You will need your strength for the journey ahead." I looked at the coffee, then at his face. His demeanor had shifted from genial host to something more menacing, more in control. The ferry, the blank-faced people, the waxy figures, and now this man's cryptic warnings. It all coalesced into a terrifying reality. I was trapped on this ship, and the journey was not what I thought it was. This was not a trip to Sydney. This was a nightmare. The unease tightened its grip, a cold hand squeezing my chest. I felt like a fly caught in a web, and the spider had just revealed itself. I looked at the coffee, feeling a desperate need for the caffeine, for anything that might clear my head. But the cafe guy's words echoed, "Don't question me. Just believe the journey is normal." A trap. The plates, the coffee, the seemingly kind offer, all part of a larger, terrifying design. I picked up the mug, my hand shaking slightly, and brought it to my lips. The coffee tasted bitter. The ship's engines throbbed on, a relentless mechanical heartbeat beneath my feet. The rhythmic churn of the propellers seemed to whisper his warnings, confirming the horrifying truth of my predicament. Every surface, every shadow, seemed to hold a new, unsettling secret. The ship was alive, and I was its unwilling passenger, caught in its bizarre, unending routine. The ship's engines still vibrated with their constant rhythm, but a new sensation permeated the air. The deep rumble softened, changing pitch, signaling a decrease in speed. I stood at the railing, my fingers gripping the cold metal, a surge of adrenaline pushing through me. The gray, featureless ocean had given way to a distinct horizon, a distant outline on the water. It sharpened into familiar shapes, structures that made my breath catch in my throat. The Sydney Harbour Bridge arched against a bright blue sky, its steel framework gleaming in the morning sun. To its right, the iconic sails of the Opera House rose majestically, white and pure. The city skyline spread out beyond them, a vibrant tapestry of buildings and bustling activity. A ferry, smaller than this monstrous vessel, cut a white path across the sparkling water, heading towards a busy circular quay. This was real. This was home. The nightmare was over. A wave of relief, so potent it made my knees weak, washed over me. I pressed my face against the cool railing, tears pricking my eyes. The freedom I craved, the solid ground, the familiar world waited just ahead. The ship was slowing further, preparing to dock. This was my chance. I would not wait for any gangplank. I would not walk among the blank-faced passengers, or past the waxy figures who might now be stirring. I would reclaim my life immediately. I scanned the railing for a suitable spot. The stern seemed best, away from the few inert figures scattered on the deck. The water below looked inviting, a deep azure far more appealing than the deck I stood on. A quick swim, a dash onto the shore, and I would be free. My heart pounded with a frantic hope, a desperate need for solid ground. I gripped the railing, my knuckles white, and swung my leg over. My movements were clumsy but driven by pure instinct. The ship made a soft creaking sound, the engines almost silent now. I braced myself, preparing to push off, to plunge into the welcoming water. The chill of the air on my exposed skin was invigorating. The city spread before me, a promise of salvation. A hand, surprisingly strong, clamped around my arm. The grip was iron hard, stopping my movement abruptly. I gasped, struggling against it, my head snapping around. It was the cafe guy. His face held no trace of the genial mask he had worn earlier. His eyes behind the spectacles were cold, flat, utterly devoid of warmth. "Where do you think you are going?" he asked, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. The question was not a query, but a statement of absolute authority. I twisted, trying to wrench my arm free, my gaze still fixed on the shimmering city beyond him. "Let me go. We're here. We're in Sydney." His grip tightened, causing pain to shoot through my arm. He pulled me back forcefully, away from the railing, until my feet were firmly on the deck. I stumbled, losing my balance for a moment, then stood glaring at him, my chest heaving. "The journey isn't over yet," he said, his voice quiet but resonating with an unnerving power. A cruel smile stretched his lips, devoid of humor. I snarled, ready to argue, ready to fight, my eyes darting back to the glorious skyline. But the city was gone. My breath hitched in my throat. The harbor bridge, the opera house, the bustling quay, the blue sky, the small ferries, all of it had vanished. Where the vibrant metropolis had been, there was only a vast, empty expanse of gray-green water, stretching to a distant, hazy horizon. The sky above was a uniform, oppressive gray. No land, no other ships, just the endless, desolate sea. The ship, my prison, floated alone in a void. The sounds of a bustling city had been replaced by the mournful churn of the ship's distant engines and the faint slap of waves against the hull. The air, which had felt fresh and promising moments before, now carried a cold, damp chill. The hope that had filled me, that had made me leap with abandon, dissolved into a cold, crushing dread. It was never there. It was never real. I stood frozen, staring at the empty expanse, my mind screaming in denial. The cafe guy still held my arm, his grip unrelenting. I looked at his face again. The coldness in his eyes deepened, a silent, terrible confirmation. His smile remained, a chilling testament to my delusion. I was not reaching Sydney. I was not escaping. I was adrift on this ship, and the shore I believed I saw was nothing but a cruel, elaborate lie. The reality of my entrapment settled over me, heavy and absolute, solidifying into a monstrous, inescapable truth. The ship's engines maintained their distant, mournful churn, a rhythm that was now the pulse of my inescapable dread. The gray sea stretched out before us, an unchanging expanse under an equally featureless sky. The cafe guy released my arm, his chilling smile lingering as he turned and walked away, melting back into the ship's interior. I remained at the railing, my hands gripping the cold metal, my eyes fixed on the empty horizon. There was nothing, only the vast emptiness that had swallowed my hope. Then the ship turned slowly, its bow swinging to the east. The gray horizon began to ripple, distorting into new shapes. Not land, but something else, something fluid and wrong. As we sailed closer, the distortion solidified, resolving into a landscape that tore a gasp from my throat. The opera house stood on the water, not solid and white, but a monstrous, calcified ruin. Its iconic sails were jagged shards of bone-like material, broken and fused into grotesque organic forms. Dark, viscous liquid seeped from its cracks, dripping into the turbulent water below. The air grew thick with a metallic tang, a smell of decay and something chemical. The water surrounding this warped landmark was not gray, but a sickly green, churning with unnatural currents. Shadows moved beneath its surface. As the ferry glided past this horrific parody, I saw figures clinging to its bony ridges. They were the waxy people, but transformed further. Their limbs were too long, their bodies emaciated and twisted. Their heads, once almost human, had elongated into skull-like shapes, their mouths stretched in silent, gaping screams. They did not move with grace now, but twitched, their movements jerky and unsettling. Some stared at us with hollow eyes. Others clawed at the bone sails, their rasping nails scoring the grotesque material. The ferry sailed onward, and the opera house receded, replaced by another impossible sight. The harbor bridge appeared, but it was not steel and concrete. It was a skeletal arch of rusted, corroded metal, its girders bent and broken like shattered ribs. From its highest point, chains hung down, thick and corroded, swaying gently in the unseen wind. And on these chains, bodies dangled. They were human, or had been. Their clothes were rags, their skin desiccated and dark, their heads lolled at unnatural angles. The wind, or something else, caused them to sway slowly, like macabre pendulums. As we passed beneath the bridge, a sudden, blinding flash erupted. The scene around me changed, twisting into a vision of the past. The ferry vanished. I stood on a rough wooden dock. The air was thick with the stench of sweat and unwashed bodies. Below me, a ship, a crude wooden vessel, was being unloaded. Men in tattered, striped uniforms, their faces gaunt and bruised, stumbled onto the shore, prodded by guards with muskets. They were convicts. Their eyes held a desperate, animal fear. A man screamed as a whip cracked, its sound sharp and brutal. Then, another flash, and I was back on the ferry, the rusted bridge and its hanging bodies once again before me. The scent of salt and decay filled my nostrils. The ship continued its relentless journey. The landmarks of Sydney Harbor appeared one after another, each more horribly twisted than the last. Luna Park became a collapsing facade of splintered wood and jagged teeth, its iconic face a rictus of terror. The bustling docks of Circular Quay were now a swamp of festering refuse, where things with too many limbs dragged themselves from the putrid water. Buildings on the shoreline were skeletal frameworks, their windows like empty eyes, their stone walls weeping black ooze. The world outside was a decaying mockery, a festering wound on the fabric of reality. The monstrous figures clinging to these distorted landmarks grew more numerous, their forms more varied and grotesque. Some skittered on all fours, their bodies covered in patches of matted hair and scales. Others floated just above the water, their shapes indistinct, shimmering with a sickly luminescence. Their presence created a constant low hum in the air, a sound that vibrated deep in my bones. Then, the ferry shuddered. A gangplank, previously unseen, extended from the side of the ship to what appeared to be a patch of solidified, rotting water. Figures began to board. These were different from the waxy drones or the monstrous beings outside. These were solid, menacing. They wore dark, heavy coats and broad-brimmed hats, their faces obscured by deep shadows. They carried crude, heavy weapons, bludgeons, hooks, and rusted blades. They moved with purpose, their heavy boots thudding on the deck. They spread out, searching, their hidden gazes sweeping across the few inert passengers and myself. My heart hammered against my ribs. These figures were not passive. They were hunters. One of them, taller and broader than the rest, pointed a bludgeon towards me. "There," a voice grated, muffled and harsh. "The one who still sees." Panic seized me. I turned to run, my legs clumsy. But there was nowhere to go. The deck was open. The railings offered no escape. The hulking figures advanced, their movements slow but deliberate. Their heavy coats seemed to absorb the light. I scrambled back, my foot catching on something unseen, sending me sprawling to the deck. The ground felt cold and gritty against my skin. One of the figures raised its bludgeon. Its shadow fell over me, cold and suffocating. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the impact. A guttural roar, deep and resonating, tore through the ship. The sound vibrated through the deck, through my very bones. The air crackled with an unseen energy. The advancing figures froze. Their bludgeons lowered. They stood still like statues. I opened my eyes, slowly. The source of the sound was not in front of me, but behind, from the captain's quarters. The door to the cabin, which had always been shut tight, now stood ajar. A deep, impossible shadow seeped from the opening, expanding, coalescing into a form that defied comprehension. It was immense, filling the entire doorway, then spilling out onto the deck. It was a shifting mass of dark, leathery flesh, scaled and rippling. Tendrils, thick as ship's ropes, writhed from its indistinct form, testing the air. 2 eyes, vast and glowing with an internal malevolent light, opened in the center of the mass. They were ancient, abyssal, fixed on the aggressive figures. The roar came again, a sound that threatened to tear the ship apart. The air filled with a hot, putrid stench, a smell of ancient oceans and fresh blood. The dark-coated figures recoiled, their heavy weapons clattering to the deck. They backed away slowly, their bodies trembling. The giant entity from the captain's quarters continued its silent, menacing expansion, its tendrils snaking further onto the deck. The figures, now showing utter terror, turned and stumbled back towards the gangplank, abandoning their weapons. They scrambled off the ferry, disappearing into the rotting waters as quickly as they had arrived. The monstrous entity did not pursue them. It remained at the captain's door, its vast, luminous eyes fixed on me for a single, agonizing moment. In those eyes, I saw not intelligence but a chilling, indifferent power, a force of primordial horror. It did not speak. It did not move further. It simply existed, a living wall of impossible dread. The air pulsed with its presence. The tension drained from the scene, leaving behind a cold vacuum. The ferry continued its journey through the nightmare landscape. My body, which had been pushed to its absolute limit, finally gave out. The terror, the exhaustion, the constant barrage of impossible sights and sounds became too much. The world tilted. The ship's deck rose to meet me. I collapsed. The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me were those vast, glowing eyes from the captain's quarters, watching. I woke to a series of deafening blasts. The sound vibrated through the deck, through my skull, making my teeth ache. My head throbbed. I pushed myself up. My limbs felt heavy, my eyes gritty. The deck lights flickered. The entire ship groaned, a metallic shriek that rose above the explosions. I stumbled to the railing, peering out into the oppressive gray. A sight filled the horizon. A cargo ship, a black wall, bore down on us. Its bow cut through the water. It grew larger with speed. It blotted out the sky. Its scale dwarfed our ferry. There was no avoiding the collision. No time remained for thought. Instinct pushed me to survive. The blasts came again, closer. The ship shuddered violently. It listed hard to one side. I felt the pressure of the approaching vessel. The air grew dense and hot around me. The impact would pulverize. I gripped the railing, my eyes wide. I released it. I vaulted over the side, plunging into the cold, churning water below. The shock of the cold water took my breath. It enveloped me, dragging me down into a green-black darkness. I kicked hard, fighting panic, forcing myself upwards. The engine still roared, but the sound was muffled by the water. I felt the wash of the cargo ship's passage, a current threatening to pull me under. I broke the surface, gasping. My lungs burned. My hair plastered to my face. Salty water stung my eyes. I blinked, clearing my vision. I turned to look for the ferry, for the cargo ship. There was nothing. The sea stretched out around me, vast and empty. The gray sky met the gray-green water at a distant, sceneless horizon. No ship existed. No wreckage existed. No sound existed but the lapping of waves against my body. The cargo ship, the ferry, the giant entity, the twisted landmarks, all were gone. I was alone. I was afraid. Adrift in an empty ocean. No land showed. No direction appeared. No hint of what had been or what would be existed. Only the water surrounded me. Only the water surrounded me. Only me existed. Mike and I had built a world entirely our own, crafted from endless laughter and meticulously planned mischief. Our wedding began with me sailing down the aisle as a pirate queen, and Mike waited at the altar dressed entirely as a sentient chrome robot. Our approach to life simply never changed. When our daughter Jamie arrived, her nursery became a miniature amusement park filled with playful surprises. She often woke to a ceiling covered in glowing stars or a mobile that spun whimsical, harmless optical illusions. We believed in a joyful chaos, a gentle zaniness that kept everyday life exciting. Our annual Christmas tradition was the peak of our creative pranking. Each year we tried to outdo our previous schemes, making the festive season a long game of elaborate gags and surprising reveals. One year, every present was triple-wrapped in concrete and required a chisel to open. The next, a remote-controlled Santa delivered gifts on a zipline across the living room. Our family knew to expect nothing less than complete absurdity from our house. We thrived on the anticipation of discovery. The moment someone stumbled upon a hidden spring-loaded pie, or the look on Mike's face when he realized his morning coffee was actually a mug of warm gravy. These complex jokes were simply how we showed love and celebrated together, forming the fabric of our uniquely festive routine. A blast of cold air hit the room as the front door flew inward, splintering slightly against the wall. A large green figure stood framed against the snowy night, clutching a red sack. It lumbered inside with purposeful strides. Its grotesque face was fixed in a permanent sneer, a design I knew Mike had been working on for months. It moved with surprising speed towards Jamie's bassinet in the corner. My mouth opened in a wide laugh. "Mike, you absolute genius," I thought. This was a masterpiece, even for him, the perfect escalation for our Christmas traditions. The clawed hand reached down into the bassinet. Jamie, swaddled in her festive blanket, was lifted effortlessly. She disappeared into the red sack with the faintest of gurgles. The Grinch then swept the colorful pile of gifts into its overflowing sack from under the tree. I watched it disappear back into the night, the front door swinging shut behind it with a soft thud. There was no terror in my body. Only admiration for Mike's timing. I knew what came next. This was our signal for an epic Home Alone-style evening, where we would chase our stolen treasures across the house, usually ending with a midnight feast. I headed straight for the bathroom to draw a hot bath, ready for the usual joyous chaos. I stepped from the warm bath, the steam still clinging to my skin as I wrapped myself in a large towel. The living room remained a disaster, presents strewn across the floor and the front door standing slightly ajar, just as the Grinch had left it. I called out to Mike, he who dealt it on. "Time to clean up your mess." Mike walked in from the kitchen, a mug in his hand. He stopped at the side of the room, his brow furrowing. "My mess? What are you talking about, Lori?" My smile pulled away from my face. A coldness began to spread through my chest, a weight settling there. Mike's eyes held no trace of his usual mischief, only confusion. "The Grinch, Mike. Your Grinch. The one who took Jamie and all the gifts." He stared at me, his head shaking. "I did not build a Grinch, Lori. And I did not take Jamie." The words echoed. A heavy stillness settled in the room. A terrifying certainty bloomed in my stomach. I looked towards the empty bassinet in the corner, a festive blanket still crumpled inside. The gurgle of Jamie's breathing was gone. The cooing was gone. Only an unnatural quiet remained, swallowing all the usual sounds of our home and leaving behind a terrifying void. The fairy lights strung between makeshift stalls pulsed with festive colors, throwing a cheerful glow across the muddy ground. The aroma of mulled wine and roasted chestnuts filled the cold night air, mixing with the scent of pine and something else indefinable. I gripped my steaming mug, the warmth seeping into my gloved fingers. Charlie leaned beside me, his breath puffing white clouds as he spoke of his latest find. Then he lowered his voice, the cheer leaving his tone. He mentioned Terry the butcher and the girls from the local high school. People said Terry had taken them. The market's boisterous activity continued around us, an unnerving backdrop to the disturbing claims. The whispers about Terry continued, passing from stall to stall, and the police never showed their faces here. Later that evening, Katie joined us near a smoky brazier. She sipped her own mulled wine, looking around at the crowd. Charlie asked her if she had heard anything new about Terry. Katie just shrugged her shoulders. She then mentioned his pork pies. They had gotten much cheaper recently, she said, and the taste was a bit off, she added, shrugging again. A cold dread settled in my stomach. The image of Terry's shop, the butcher's apron, and the missing girls collided in my mind. The warmth of my mulled wine did not reach that chill. The market's noises faded around us, replaced by a sudden sickening clarity. The truth about the cheaper pies and the missing girls began to form a shape too terrible to name. The earlier stories about Terry's abductions now twisted into something far worse. My stomach clenched at Katie's words, but I forced a laugh, a hollow, grating sound. "Pies? You think Terry's making pies out of people?" "That's mad, Katie." I shook my head, trying to dismiss the thought, to push the image of something so monstrous away. Katie just looked at me, her eyes glinting in the brazier's light. A slow, unsettling grin spread across her face, and then she delivered a quick, knowing wink. "This is a real black market, Jacob," she said, her voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial tone. "You think you're buying off the book's electronics, but everything here has a deeper story." She paused, letting her words hang in the cold air. Then she continued, her voice full of a strange pride. "Authentic dark dealings, you know. It keeps the prices down." Charlie, oblivious to the undercurrents of our conversation, took another deep swallow of his mulled wine. His brow furrowed, a slight grimace on his face as he swallowed. "This batch tastes a bit metallic," he mumbled, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. He held up his half-eaten pigs and blanket skewer, a greasy, glistening string of small, dark sausages wrapped in bacon. He poked at one of the little parcels, trying to dislodge a bit of gristle, but found nothing. He bit into another one, chewing slowly. A strange emptiness was there. No bone, no cartilage, no telltale nail fragments. Just the smooth, yielding texture of the meat. A cold, heavy weight dropped in my chest. The festive lights now seemed to mock us, their cheerful pulse a stark contrast to the quiet horror settling around our little group. The market continued its boisterous activity, its true nature laid bare in the cloying scent of roasted meat and the easy laughter of the crowd. The late hour brought no comfort, it only marked the arrival of that noise again. My shift ended hours ago, but sleep remained a distant promise. The scratch started at 11 every night, presenting an infuriating consistency. It was not loud enough to shake the walls, but it continued, a scraping sound coming through the wall from next door. I knew it was coming from their living room, directly on the other side of my own bedroom wall. My neighbors were always there, day in and day out, doing nothing. They were on disability, collecting their payments, existing on handouts from the state. I went to work every morning, grinding through long hours, while they stayed home. I imagined them sitting there, waiting for the clock to hit 11, ready to inflict their nightly torment upon me. The sound was a scrape. It was dry and it was short. A pause followed each scrape, and then it scraped again. It continued for hours. This was torment, and it was deliberate and calculated. I asked my girlfriend about the sound. She would stir from her sleep, mumbling something about the building settling or the pipes. She never heard the scraping. Her eyes would close again, pulling her back into deep sleep, leaving me alone with my irritation. My ears strained, picking up every variation in the rhythm and every change in the pressure behind the scrape. It was a personal attack. It was a direct assault on my peace, for they knew I was trying to sleep, and they knew how late I worked. My hands often shook. My eyes felt gritty from lack of proper rest. My frustration festered. Each night, the scraping dug deeper into my mind. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, picturing them on the other side of the wall. I saw their faces as they made that noise. The scrape echoed inside my head even when it stopped, tightening my jaw and clenching my fists. The thought of them, smug and comfortable while I suffered, fueled a deep resentment within me. I needed it to stop, whatever the cost. The scraping noise was a physical weight on my chest, a constant, gnawing presence. I knew I needed to take drastic measures to stop it. I spent days researching soundproofing techniques, poring over diagrams and material specifications. My plan formed slowly, taking shape with obsessive precision. I would build a new wall, thicker and stronger, directly in front of the existing one separating my bedroom from their living room. The project would be expensive, draining my savings completely. It would also be exhausting, consuming my evenings and weekends, but the cost was irrelevant. Peace was worth any price. I calculated the exact amount of lumber, insulation, drywall, and acoustical sealant required. I drew out schematics for the frame, ensuring every stud would align perfectly. The work had to be flawless to achieve true isolation from the torment. I told Sarah my plan. She stood there, watching me lay out blueprints on the kitchen table, her expression a mix of concern and bewilderment. She tried to reason with me, suggesting earplugs or a white noise machine. She mentioned the expense, the disruption, the sheer futility of such a massive undertaking for a sound that was not really there. Her disbelief only strengthened my resolve. She did not understand the personal nature of the assault. I started on a Saturday morning, the first swing of the crowbar against the existing drywall, a liberating act. The plaster cracked and crumbled, releasing a cloud of particles into the air. I tore down sections, exposing the bare studs. Each piece I removed felt like shedding a layer of my frustration. The existing wall offered pitiful protection. My new wall would be a fortress. I hauled lumber into the house, stacking the heavy planks in the living room. I measured and cut each stud with painstaking accuracy, creating a new skeleton. Then I installed the thickest sound insulation I could find, filling every gap, every cavity. The material felt dense and promising. The work was arduous, leaving my muscles aching and my hands raw, but I pushed through the soreness. I imagined each layer I added absorbing another piece of their nightly torment, silencing it forever. I sealed every seam with acoustical caulk, determined not to leave a single crack for the sound to penetrate. I would finish this wall, and I would finally sleep again. I worked relentlessly through the weekend, stripping away the old drywall. Each sheet came off with a tearing sound, exposing the wooden studs underneath. My arms ached, but the thought of the scraping noise finally being banished drove me forward. Sarah helped me clear away the debris, stacking the broken pieces of plaster and paper into neat piles. We had made good progress. Most of the bedroom wall was now down to the bare framework. I reached for a particularly stubborn section near the corner, wedging my crowbar deeply into a seam. I pulled with all my strength. The drywall groaned, then tore free from the studs, peeling away from the structure. Sarah gasped, a sharp, choked sound that startled me. Her face had gone pale, her eyes wide with a terror I had never seen before. She stumbled backward, bumping into the stack of lumber behind her. My gaze followed hers to the section of drywall I had just removed. It had flipped over as it fell. On the hidden side, facing into what had been the void between our walls, were marks. They were crudely drawn in something dark and permanent, a series of short lines grouped into fives, like old-fashioned tally marks. Many of them had thick, deliberate crosses drawn through them, striking them out. There were too many to count quickly, stretching across the dusty surface. A cold dread began to creep up my spine, replacing my exhaustion. This was not just a wall, it was a record. I ignored Sarah's shaking hand reaching for me, stepping closer to the exposed studs. The space behind the removed drywall was darker, revealing more of the hidden world. Further demolition was needed. I pulled away another section of intact plaster from the adjacent stud. As it came loose, a small hole became visible, perfectly drilled through the wood. It was an eye-level peephole, looking directly into my bedroom. My stomach twisted. I kept tearing away at the remaining drywall pieces. More inscriptions became visible, scrawled directly onto the rough-hewn timber of the studs and the back of the plasterboard I had just cleared away. The writing was uneven, almost frantic. Days left alive, one phrase read, etched deeply into the wood. Below it, more tallied marks were visible, but these were not crossed out. Underneath those, there were other phrases, a chilling list of calculations and instructions. They detailed times, routes, and what appeared to be methods for silent entry and disposal. The words formed plans, outlining a careful and deliberate path towards an unspeakable act. They were written by a methodical hand, detailing what would happen next. I stared at the list of calculations. The final remaining tally mark stood alone, pointing with almost deliberate precision towards the wall where the stud met the floor. Sarah's choked sobs were fading, replaced by a rushing sound in my ears. I knelt, hands scraping the baseboard, pulling it free with a wrench. The wood splintered, revealing a narrow opening. Plastic sheen reflected dim light from the window. I tore at it, my fingers catching on the thick material. It parted with a sickening suction sound, exposing what lay beneath. A sealed void shimmered in the darkness beyond. Two forms were pressed together, faces gray and shriveled, eyes sunk in hollows. Meticulously wrapped in industrial-grade plastic, they were vacuum-sealed with clinical efficiency. The air grew heavy with the stench of long-dead flesh. A cloying sweetness coated my tongue. The noise, the scraping. It echoed in my skull, not from the wall, but from inside me. It had never been them. It had been the plastic ceiling, the drag of bodies across the floor, my frantic scratching against the wall to muffle the final, desperate struggle. My memory, fragmented, distorted, pieced itself back together with horrifying clarity. The ledger, peephole, plans. They were all mine. The quiet truth settled, chilling me to the bone. They had been dead for months. The torment was never external. It was the collapse of my own sanity. My feet ached from another long shift on St. Mary's oncology ward. I needed the cool night air outside, a familiar routine now. I had promised my sister this was my last week of smoking, but the constant stress of my work made keeping that promise impossible. Pushing through the heavy door to the fire escape, I smelled damp concrete and antiseptic. Distant machines whirred within the hospital walls. I lit my cigarette, taking a slow, deep drag, the bitter taste of fleeting comfort in the somber quiet. My feet ached from another long shift on St. Mary's oncology ward. I needed the cool night air outside, a familiar routine now. I had promised my sister this was my last week of smoking, but the constant stress of my work made keeping that promise impossible. Pushing through the heavy door to the fire escape, I smelled damp concrete and antiseptic. Distant machines whirred within the hospital walls. I lit my cigarette, taking a slow, deep drag, the bitter taste of fleeting comfort in the somber quiet. A man stood a few feet away, leaning against the cold metal railing. He was very thin, his hospital gown hanging loosely on his gaunt frame. His face was pale, skin stretched tight over sharp bones, and his eyes held a fixed, distant stare. "Mind if I join you?" he whispered, his voice ragged and dry. I nodded. He moved with an unnerving slowness and stopped beside me, coolness radiating from him. He extended a surprisingly steady hand. "Mike," he said. His skin was shockingly cold when I took his hand. "You shouldn't smoke," he stated, watching the smoke curl. "There's always a just for now until there is no later left. I regret a lot of just for nows." His eyes held a sorrow. "Mine is due any minute now." His words forged a peculiar, unsettling connection. Mike simply turned, his gaunt frame dissolving into the night air as if he were never truly solid. I stood there, cigarette forgotten between my fingers, staring at the empty space where he had been. On the cold railing where his hand had rested lay a small, worn silver lighter. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs, but I forced myself to reach for it. The metal was icy, a chilling counterpart to his touch. I pushed through the heavy fire escape door, the hospital's interior suddenly feeling too warm, too bright. I walked back down the oncology ward, my eyes scanning the room numbers. Mike. What room had he been in? I needed to check on him. I approached the nursing station, where Nurse Miller sat charting. "Excuse me," I said, my voice sounding strained. "Patient Mike, the gaunt man. Do you know his room number?" Nurse Miller looked up, her brow furrowed with confusion. "Mike? You mean Michael Albright? He was in 312. She paused, her expression softening. "He passed away about 3 hours ago. We're waiting for transfer to the morgue now." The air left my lungs in a silent rush. My hand instinctively went to my wrist. The skin where he had touched me pulsed with a distinct, unsettling cold, a chilling counterpart to the room's warmth. Dread coiled deep within me. He had been dead for hours. The encounter with Mike remade something inside me. His gaunt face and those sorrowful eyes became a frequent memory, returning to my thoughts at unexpected moments. I stopped smoking at once. The worn silver lighter he left on the railing stayed in my pocket, its coldness a constant physical reminder. Sometimes my wrist would feel that distinct, localized chill again, a sensation that defied explanation even when the ward air was warm. Weeks turned into months. Occasionally, when I stepped onto the fire escape at night, I would glimpse a shadow at the railing, a momentary distortion in the shape of a man. There were no words, no gestures, just a fleeting presence that dissipated if I stared too long. It was always enough to make my breath catch, bringing back his warning clearly. There's always a just for now, until there is no later left. I understood this was his reminder, ensuring I remembered his regret, his promise made too late. The chill on my wrist and those fleeting shadows served as a persistent, unsettling warning about the consequences of unaddressed habits. I had driven for hours, the highway blurring into a monotonous ribbon of asphalt. My eyes felt heavy in the fading light. A sign for a roadside lodge, its neon half-broken, promised a bed and a shower through the gloom. I turned into the parking lot. The building was a plain beige stucco rectangle, unremarkable. I parked and walked to the entrance. A hand-scrawled note taped crookedly to the main door caught my eye. It read, in uneven letters, "Yes, yes, yes." I raised an eyebrow. Inside, a young woman with tired eyes sat behind a plastic counter, scrolling through her phone. "Checking in," I said, sliding my card across. She barely looked up. "Room 17, she mumbled, handing me a heavy brass key. I glanced back at the door. "What's with the note?" I asked, pointing. She waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, that's just Kevin, the owner's kid. He's a bit creative. Leaves little messages sometimes. Don't mind him." Her bored tone dismissed any further thought. I picked up the key and walked toward my room, accepting her explanation without question. The world felt normal. I woke in my room after a night's sleep. The bed had been comfortable for a roadside lodge. I dressed, ready to start the day. I unlocked my door and stepped into the hallway. My steps took me back towards the lobby door. I saw it before I reached the exit. Another note was taped where the first one had been. This note stated, "No, no, no." The message reversed the one from the night before. I paused with my hand on the doorknob. Kevin must have been busy again. The receptionist had mentioned his creativity. The repeated "no" created a tension in my chest. I still believed it was a kid's joke. This thought quieted the tension. I gripped the door handle and pulled it open, ready to leave. I gripped the door handle and pulled it open, ready to leave. The door did not move. I pulled again, harder, but the wood remained fixed in the frame. A sensation of cold dread spread through my stomach as I braced my shoulder against the frame and tugged with all my strength. The door did not yield. I stepped back, my eyes snapping to the note on the door. As I watched, the paper began to curl at its edges. The top line of "no" dissolved into the paper, leaving only 2 lines remaining. Then the middle, "no," vanished. Only 1 line remained, centered on the paper, now reading 3, no. The numbers were stark against the white page. My heart pounded against my ribs. I looked from the immovable door to the strange command. The meaning pressed down on me, heavy and undeniable. I was trapped here and forced to make a choice.